all. Hello, everybody. On the heels of International Women's Day, a focal point in global women's rights movement, welcome to this session, also the 145th edition of the series on business banking dialogue organized by EPS. My name is Rachna, and I am happy to be moderating today's session. To set the context for today's discussion, here are a few numbers. First, women constitute almost half of India's population, but their contribution to GDP stands at around 17% in comparison to China's 40%. Second, there are approximately 432 million working age women in India who constitute 47% of India's working age population. Of these, 75% do not have paid work. The third data point, only 59% of women have access to mobile phones with an abysmally low internet penetration rate of around 19%. Fourth data point, only 35% of women actively use their bank accounts. Fifth, although women represent 42% of the agricultural labor force in India, women own just 2% of farmland. And finally, India ranked 112 of 153 countries in World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index 2020, down 4 places since 2018 and down 14 places since 2006. As one of the fastest growing economies in the world, India has made significant progress in financial inclusion in the last few years, with many government initiatives and new financial service players reaching the underbanked population. But there are still some barriers that restricts these women to take advantage of financial access and participate in the economic activities. A study by McKinsey concluded that India could add up to $770 billion to its GDP by 2025, which is 25% of India's current GDP, if female labor force participation in the country is brought at par with that of males. Given this context, and given that nearly 66% of India resides in rural areas, we have a panel of experts amongst us this evening to discuss and deliberate upon some of the whys and whats of building a gender-inclusive financial system for rural India. We'd like to take a moment to introduce each of them. Our first guest this evening is Renuka Sane, who is the Associate Professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. We welcome her. To give you a brief background, Professor Sane has research interests in household finance, especially on household choice in financial instruments such as credit, pensions, insurance, and equity markets, as well as consumer protection in finance. She's also interested in research and policy on criminal justice system in India. She was a peer reviewer of the Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission on Consumer Protection. She was also on the research team of the Bankruptcy Legislative Reforms Committee on the Insolvency of Individuals and research team for the DEA Committee on Mis-Selling. She is also a member of the Pension Advisory Committee of the Pension Fund Regulatory Development Authority. She has a PhD in economics from University of New South Wales and holds an MA in economics from Mumbai University. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to our second guest. This evening, her name is Purvi Bhavsar. She's a first-generation entrepreneur from Ahmedabad and co-founder and managing director of Pehel Financial Services and NBFC MFI, working in the area of microfinance and enterprise lending. She has a prolific experience of over 27 years in the area of BFSI and telecom, having worked in some of the most reputed organizations in the country. She has a very diverse exposure across entire spectrum of corporate and retail banking, consumer finance, stockbroking, distribution, and customer service. She was recently recognized as Top 10 Women in Finance 2020. She's currently serving on the board of an affordable housing finance company as well. She's also undergoing a program run by Stanford Seed India and has received scholarship and mentored fintech startups as a part of Stanford's Spark program, apart from agriculture and other impact startups. Welcome, Purvi. Okay, and finally, our final guest tonight, this evening, is Priti Shah, co-founder and CEO of PaySwift. PaySwift is a pan-Asian omni-channel payment and merchant solutions provider. Under her leadership, PaySwift has been expanding and diversifying rapidly, with presence in more than 600 cities, offering the most comprehensive payment processing solutions to businesses and banks. Priti holds a doctorate in management from the National Institute of Management and comes with over 15 years of experience in payments industry. She has also been conferred as Distinguished Alumni of SNDT Women's University for her contribution in her space and is an esteemed member of Advisory Committee for Entrepreneur Cell, Pradhan Mantri Yojana at SNDT University. Prior to co-founding PaySwift, Priti was a founding team member for EBS, one of India's largest online payment processing platforms. Priti is married to Maulik Shah, co-founder and executive director at PaySwift. A warm welcome, Priti.
Thanks a lot.
Great. So shall we jump right in with the questions?
Yeah.
Okay. So first question to Professor Sane. So here I go. So India succeeded in reducing the gender gap in financial inclusion in the last 3-4 years. And the percentage of women in India who are reported to own a bank account rose from 26% in 2011 to 77% in 2017. The gender gap in terms of account ownership effectively reduced from 20 percentage points in 2014 to just 6 percentage points in 2017. But the gender gap in usage of these accounts stayed high at 11 percentage points. So our question to you is, what restricts these women account holders access financial services? And another parallel to this would be that 55% of PMJDY accounts are owned by women, which is approximately 232 million accounts. And the problems are not all poor women have PMJDY accounts, and not all PMJDY accounts belong to poor. So what's your take on that?
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. I'm delighted to be in the presence of all of you. Let me jump straight in as to what I think is the problem with usage. And I think that there are three distinct problems. Okay, so the first problem is really the question of autonomy. So ultimately, both when decision making at the household level, I mean, it's related to who's making the decisions at the level of the household in terms of, where money is spent or where money is invested. And if we have structures where women are typically not involved in making these decisions, then you will automatically see that their usage and involvement in financial decisions and financial products is rather low. Similarly, if you have such poor labor force participation of the women, then the money coming in is, where is the money coming in from, and where is it going out? So if the channels of inflow are restricted because you are always working at home, then again your usage of these financial products becomes lower. So I think that we cannot divorce away these questions of usage from autonomy of the women in the house itself, and these issues of who is making decisions for what. The second reason why usage, according to me, is low is because actually women don't know how to ask or what their rights when they enter into contracts with financial service providers are. So, for example, we've done some field work where we have gone and asked women about problems they face when using whatever minimal financial products that they may be using. And what we find is that women have just internalized bad behavior by financial service providers. So sometimes they are rude, they don't answer questions, and hence you just don't even go and ask, or you just change your behavior. So to give you one example, this woman's card got stuck, and this is again in rural Maharashtra. Woman's ATM card got stuck. The bank manager just shouted at her, and her response was not to complain about the bank manager, because that's how they talk, but actually to stop using the ATM card and go and withdraw money from the teller. So she has stopped using the financial product because grievance redress systems were not in place. She did not know where to complain, and she did not have any means of solving her problem. Similarly, sometimes they just stay away from finance entirely because, if something goes wrong, where do you go? And if this is not clear, then it's just better to stay away from it. So I think that some awareness of what their rights are and some mechanism for them to go and access a complaints mechanism or solve their problems will go a long way in improving usage. So, for example, there is a lot of talk of better grievance redress management through technology. But as you just mentioned in your opening remarks, that most women don't own a smartphone. So if you're setting up all of these systems that are internet based, then you're just leaving women out of the modern grm that you may set up. So I think that some recalibration of the reality of where women are, what kind of technology products they have, what kind of autonomy is actually, whether we like it or not, that is the reality. And what around it can you build so that you get the women out, so that they're aware of their rights, will go a long way in improving usage of these products. And finally, is the question of financial literacy. Financial literacy I mean, everybody's financial literacy is rather poor, but the gap between the men and the women is much higher. And when I say financial literacy, I don't just mean that you know how to calculate compound interest. I mean, a plethora of things, such as how do you think of products, how do you think of portfolio, how do you think of your life expectancy, how do you think of emergency financing? What do you think are your rights when you enter into financial contracts? What is acceptable, what is not, where can you go to complain? I think that without knowledge of all of these things, it's not surprising that the response of women is that, you know what, I just want to stay away from it, because all of this is so complex that I can't venture out. So I think that that would be the summary of why I think women don't use products. One is just general autonomy. Second is just no knowledge of their rights and no mechanism to access some grievance redress mechanism. And third is just very poor financial literacy.
Hmm. Well said, Professor Sane. So this was primarily a demand side perspective. Now let's get to the supply side perspective, and I'll come to you, Purvi, because you are a lender yourself. So in order to increase the participation of women in the Indian economy, governments, banks, financial institutions like yourselves, and corporations need to provide wider access to financial services at grassroots. So what can be done, and where all can these institutions make a difference in closing the gap?
Sure. See, what I understand is, I will just go a bit, backward in terms of what is missing is education. If you understand, we talk about that, people are not aware where to go, what happens. I think also using a payment instrument effectively, that education itself is missing. In fact, I was thinking, rural is far away. One is that even in urban, how many of us know, especially I'm talking about you order from Myntra, you order from Amazon, but how many of women know actually that what kind of payment instrument needs to be used and how effectively? Majority of the transaction which happens from a woman, especially housewives, happen through cash on delivery. So today, I think education drive is extremely important in terms of educating women that how effectively a payment instrument needs to be used, whether it's a debit card, a credit card, or a UPI, or any form of instrument. So from my perspective, I don't think enough initiatives have been done in terms of education. I think we need to spend, sort of amount of funds in terms of literacy, in terms of educating women and how they are going to be a part of the ecosystem. Because what happens is, even today, as the bank accounts have been done on a second for a woman, the entire control in terms of the monetary, especially when you are not a financial independent, lies with a male. So I think that education is extremely important, because whenever I speak to some of my friends or my circle, they feel that's a very complex process. The minute I told about that, why do you use cash? I have even 50 rupees in my wallet, to be very honest. I come completely on digital. And when I see them using plethora of cash, I'm like, why do you use cash? No, Priti, it's so complex using a payment instrument. I said, really? I said, it's not complex. So the entire education is missing. I was just thinking, rather than we having a math subject in a school, why can't we have this as a subject, to compulsory, which is actually makes a huge impact, rather than having a 2 + 2 4. Can we have a subject introduced in schools and colleges, how do you use? Because that is a mindset what happens. So I would say that the bigger issue is the education.
Okay.
That is what we need to have.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Priti. Thanks, Priti. And Purvi, what would your take be with respect to what can, government, banks, financial institutions like yourselves or cooperation, what can, they do, and where all can these institutions make, a difference in closing the gap from a supply side?
So Rachna, I always keep talking about, the self-help. So let me take a minute to first talk about, something really very basic. So while we can keep blaming or giving a lot of credit to all the institutions, whether FI, DFIs or whatever, I really want to take a minute and talk about the theme for the International Women's Day this year. And it's a very, very thoughtful theme that they have got, which says choose to change, choose to challenge, basically. So it says that, a challenged world is an alert world, and from the challenge comes the change. So let's choose to challenge and let's choose to change. So while we will talk about, how the institutions can contribute, but the change has to start, from helping yourself. So coming to how these institutions can help from the supply side, I think if you look at the rural economy and the way things are currently, I think there are three pillars of financial literacy which needs to be addressed, which is deposits, credit, and insurance. And I think all three we are lagging behind big time. Whether you compare with the male within the country or you compare with any other country, whether male, female, urban, rural is lagging behind. Even worse. So we are worst even on the rural front. So these three pillars are something that needs to be addressed by all the institutions. So basically, when we talk about deposits, most banks are generally interested in opening that small little deposit or opening savings account and all, where it is much easier for them because it's a very stable money and they enjoy that money and no major servicing required. But what women, particularly in rural areas, require is a credit. And for them, administering small credit in rural areas, given the demographics and the difficulties, is a very difficult one. So that is something which definitely requires a lot of work. And last pillar of financial literacy is insurance. We are a country, we are highly underpenetrated in terms of our insurance coverage. I think to my mind, it is less than about 4%. That is as per the last data that I had seen. And in rural areas, it would have been even lesser than that. So these are the three pillars that requires a very strong focus. The second point would be ease of access. So as Renuka already mentioned, the difficulty that one would face. So it is not just reaching to that brick and mortar structure, but also having reached there, the kind of treatment that you get, the big forms that is required or some digital thing required. So ease of access or ease of doing transaction is something that that needs to be worked upon. Also, from a rural context, if they have to visit a bank, it is sort of loss of wage for them. So when they go and visit the bank, which is not like next door, they travel 15-20 kilometers, and that means that they will miss going to the work on that particular day. So it's a loss for them. Awareness about the availability of various schemes. So there are government schemes which are available, but the awareness is extremely low in the rural areas. Increasing digital penetration, because if you want to reach out to the far-flung places in a cost-effective manner, I think digital transaction is a very good way to reach out. But our digital penetration, as you rightly said, that mobile internet penetration is hardly 20% in rural areas, particularly with women. So I think these are the things that really is required to be addressed by all the financial institutions, banks, and government. And post-pandemic, I think there is a huge requirement in rural areas, considering the reverse migration that has happened, to rebuild and restart the businesses. So, it is required like ever before.
Well, that was an interesting perspective, Purvi. So I think we'd like to, now ask Priti to jump in. And Priti, do you want to, so in your view, do women in rural India face more challenges in running their small businesses or accessing credit facilities? And if yes, what are these major challenges that hinders their participation in, financial related activities? Preeti.
Yeah, of course, yes. I mean, rural India, one is if you see that the literacy rate is so lower in terms of women out there, and it is not only the accessibility to credit is lesser, it is also the awareness that even if they want, where they should go. For example, if I am from rural India, I mean, there was a typical case of one of a woman entrepreneur who was there in in northeast, in fact we had, and who were selling khadi mask, and she wanted a payment instrument, and she got into a partner, and we were asking, so she did not know that, madam, you are giving me a a payment instrument, a POS machine. If I want to avail a loan for my business, what should I do you give loans? So one is that they do not know that if they want to go for a credit, if they want to start a business, where should they go? uh, is private banks, private lenders, NBFC? Are there microfinance companies who are doing it? So one is accessibility comes second. One is they don't know whom to approach if they are in need in terms of funds to start a new business. And obviously, our credit process in terms of underwriting, in terms of banks also, is very paper oriented. So is there something what we can do if you see that, there is a typical underwriting process for a bank in terms of the ticket value, that the way they underwrite. So can we launch some programs only for women? And can we mark some budget in terms of also bank? Because what they know is only SBI, especially in the rural area. So is there somewhere where we can educate, where we can tell that, okay, there is a budget for every bank, where the underwriting process for a woman entrepreneur, especially on the rural, is different from the normal. I don't know if that exists or not, because I'm not on that side more. More into the merchant facing in terms of payments. But can we do something of that sort, or can an NBFC kind of microfinance company do that? Is that possible? I don't know if it is. That can we look into it? So according to me, access of awareness in terms of, can we have different yojanas, different schemes in terms of doing that? Because there is a clear cut gap between a supply and demand. There is one demand which is there, where you have lot of women entrepreneurs who are asking for funds to start a business and to grow the business, while there are a lot of funds which are still piled up in terms of they using that funds in the right manner. And I don't need to talk about the bad debts. I don't need to talk about those, how it piles up. So whether the funds are being used in the right manner, because when you do it to the right woman, we are empowering a lot of things when we do that. We don't realize it is not a question of one woman. You also inspire, and you also give a lot of examples to the women around that circle, that this can happen, and that can indirectly impact the GDP to them, which I think we should do. That is my view completely.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Preeti. So we come back again to Professor Sane, and now we're talking about from a regulatory and a government intervention perspective. So do you think RBI and DFS, that is Department of Financial Services, has done enough to make sure women business correspondents are appointed by banks, which is at present hardly 10% of the total agent network? And if not, what more can banks and financial services providers do to foster women BCs in the ecosystem?
Sure. So, thanks. And you've put me on a spot uh, where, you're making me talk about DFS and RBI. But so I think that, so one of my problems with any policy intervention, whether it is the DFS or the RBI, is that we know very little about the measurement of the policy impact. So, whatever. So, for example, there have been schemes where women are given concessional interest rates for starting businesses. Then there are schemes where today you pay a lower stamp duty if the house is bought by a woman. There are multiple schemes that governments have undertaken to promote female entrepreneurship or female ownership of assets. Now, the problem there is that we actually don't know what impact they have had. So, it becomes extremely difficult to analyze whether certain subsidies, certain interest rate subsidies are actually having the effect that they are. Because very often, many of these decisions are at the unit of a family. So, we all know that many people will get the loan in the name of the woman. Because you're getting a concessional interest rate, and actually the business is run by the man. Now, should we color it and say that this is always bad? Maybe and maybe not, because ultimately if the family business does well and the woman has some autonomy in the house, it's good for her as well. So in some ways it's her contribution to the business that she's bringing in subsidized interest rates. And I think that part of the problem with many of these policy measures is actually we don't understand what they do, and we don't understand what impact they are actually having. So is it that the number of women is increasing but nothing is changing about the bargaining power of the women in the family? Or is it that more single women can actually come out and do businesses? So for example, and I want to link this to what Priti said about credit risk models, today it's very difficult for a woman to get a loan unless she shows that she is married or she has some support from her husband or her father. Now it seems bizarre to me that this might be the case. So is it that there is some credit risk, some experience in the credit markets that have led us to a point where financial institutions are extremely nervous about lending to women who do not seem to have any male support? So I think that on the policy question, I would answer that the truth is that we don't know. The truth is that none of these agencies, and I would fault both the DFS and the RBI, saying that you do X, Y, Z things, but measuring whether some policy is working or not is absolutely unknown. And if you don't know what impact the policy is having, how do you do course correction? Because you don't even know whether something has worked or not. So that's part one of my answer. Part two of my answer is that whether there are enough business correspondents or not, again, I'm not sure that we understand why that is so. Many people will claim that women don't come out because they don't want to be BCs, because the job of a BC is such that it has XYZ hours, and that kind of comes in the way of their family obligations. Now it may be true, but if that is the case, then where is the lever for change? Right? Is it that we change something about how BCs operate and give them flexi hours? Or is it something that we go to the family and run education campaigns on the family about the role of the woman in the house and what labor force participation she should do? So again, I think it's easy to say that something has not had an effect, but it's much more difficult to diagnose what the true problem is. And my fault with the overall system is that not enough analysis is done as to why is it that we are not seeing women in many of these roles that we would have expected them to see. And to be honest, the answer is not clear.
Okay, that's pretty candid of you. Okay, now we'll move on to Purvi and a slightly different topic with respect to women alone, but this time, covering the fact that why do women hesitate in handling finances? Because a very small percentage of women have had the privilege to focus on building their wealth, and and out of those also, only 33% invest their money confidently as compared to 64% of men. So to just make good, so to bring women as well to equilibrium as at least men, what can be done to encourage investments and wealth creation among women?
Rashna, this is a very classic question. I don't think there is any possible answer that I can give. But anyways, I tell you, I think it is. I think Renuka covered that. While she was answering the first question, that basically women are always taught that finance is a matter to be solely handled by the men in the family. So it's whether it's there voluntarily or they are forced or whatever it is, but they are generally not a part of that decision making process in the family. It could be because of the lack of education, lack of awareness, or lack of interest, or whatever you call it. But they are generally they are not ready to handle this. And I'm not talking about women in rural areas. I'm also talking about women who is highly educated, working, quite updated, and can handle, but doesn't want to handle. So we have issues, when I visit our borrowers in rural areas,
Yeah,
they generally would struggle to do very basic math. Forget about investing. I think the problem is very basic to start with. They cannot even, for example, the installment would be, say, for example, 1,940 rupees, and 5 women have to give this money together. they're not able to distribute the remaining money among themselves. It takes them quite an effort. They get really hassled. They really get nervous, particularly when somebody is looking at them. So forget investing. Right now, the question is then, which is more particular in rural, but in urban areas also, we face similar issues. So they don't have that basic confidence of doing the basic mathematics right. Forget investing. One of my very good friend, just to give you an example, she lost her husband very young, in her 40s, very well educated, in a government service. And after her husband, she was just not able to understand where all money was lying, how to get the death claim settled with the banks, with insurance companies. So some very basic things are missing. And as I said, there is no concrete answer, but it has to again go with the change, because a huge effort is required. The way we raise our girl child, or the way the woman is treated in the family, whether they get enough participation in the family decisions, including the financial matters. So I think it's a whole change that is required.
Sorry, Purvi, I think we can't hear you.
So what I was saying, Rachna, that, it is more than external intervention, which is, I'm sure there is a lot that can be done. A lot of efforts are required, changing the social fabric, particularly in India, where, at least you are enabling women to participate in the decisions of the family, particularly the finance related decisions. And that's where the change has to start. Then comes the the external awareness, right from, I think somebody mentioned that instead of teaching them basic math, why can't you teach them some other, more relevant things? So I think those are the things that can be taught alongside. And of course, a lot of effort needs to happen on creating the financial inclusion and the basic things.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Purvi. That was insightful as well. Now we come back to Priti. And our question for you is, now, do you think public sector banks should design more tailor-made financial products that should be aimed at incentivizing women not only to save deposit, but also to avail credit for personal and business growth? I'm assuming this is because, public sector banks has wider reach into the, deeper and wider breadths of our country. And if yes, what are the kind of products that can help?
Yeah, so I would definitely, I think PSU Bank, as you rightly mentioned, that the reach is so much into interior that no private sector bank has that reach as of now, when you compare in that sort. And today, PSU Bank do have a lot of schemes when it comes to credit, lot of product, but I have not seen a single product in terms of accessing credit to women, which is a tailor-made product that if you want to start your business, this is the credit you can avail, and this is how the process is done. The interest rate might be lower than the normal, which can not only motivate a woman to do that, but also because if there is a family, then the family also will not have the burden to do that. So I genuinely feel that the PSU Bank should have a product tailor-made for women entrepreneurs, or any female who wants to access credit in terms of the businesses, and a special product has to be designed in terms of not only lower interest rate, but also in terms of industry. For example, when you go into the to the rural areas, industries like like khadi, or also handmade items are you can see a lot of them. So industry specific product which is aligned to a particular credit, I think that kind of a product will definitely help the women, especially on the rural side.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Priti. I think I have an audience question. So shall we play that question? And then one of you can take it? Yeah? Okay. So team, could you please play that question?
Yeah. Good afternoon. This is Harish Prabhu here. Isn't it a dichotomy of sorts that, the poorest of the poor women, when they are, going into a self-help group, right, which essentially, manages their finances so well, and they understand credit and they know the importance of, building a credit history. So they, and that's the genesis, or that's the foundation of a microfinance business. On the other hand, we talk about the fact that women don't know anything about finance, at a general level, which is the truth. Why this dichotomy of sorts? My first question. Second question is, regional. We have Kerala as a shining example of the highest literacy state for now many decades. Secondly, Kerala as a state is a matriarchal society. So, including the assets, etc., of the mother, rather the mother, the lady, it's a matriarchal society, unlike any other state in India. So if anybody has, answers to these questions, if you can,
Who would like to take these two questions? You can choose to take the first one, second one. So who would like to go first?
I can answer the first one because it's more to do with SHG and JLG. And Harishji, I agree. In fact, the recovery rate possibly is the best in SHGs and JLGs across the world. The recovery rate has been more than 99% in most cases, excepting for those difficult years like the one and currently the COVID crisis. That is exactly what we are trying to do. So let me also tell you that microfinance in India has already reached to more than 4 crore women borrowers. And I'm just telling you, these are the JLG figures. And I think similar numbers have already been covered by the SHGs. So, and India also has the highest population of microcredit borrowers across the world. So this is a fact. And women have been really very great in terms of their credit history, maintaining credit. But that necessarily does not mean that they are great business people. Okay, because in a lot of cases, the money that is borrowed by a woman also is used by a man in the family. But yeah, they are great at credit. And but the other assumption is not true, that they are great at business. So these are two different things. The credit and business are two different things. Don't mix it up.
And if I may add on the credit recovery numbers, while many of these loans are group loans, and so the group as a whole is seeing very high repayment rates. However, how much of it is masked when you start looking at the credit history of the individual person in the group and who is covering for whom are statistics that only the microfinance companies probably know. Maybe they also don't know because they are just going and collecting from the group. So now what is happening to the credit of the individual person and how they are managing amongst themselves is actually not known. So I am a little skeptical, to be honest, about these repayment numbers. My sense, and I don't have data for it, is my just sense from talking to people and doing field visits, is that actually there is a lot more stress than meets the eye. We have just masked it because of this group model where we don't see the stress on the individual borrower. So perhaps these numbers will look different if you start looking at the women individually. But I completely agree with Purvi's point on what is the amount of credit that is actually used by the women for the business is also, in some cases more and in some cases a little less. So it's not as if all decision making is done by the women.
Right.
This also links to something I said earlier about, you lower interest rates, you give concessional, you lower stamp duty. So the woman then becomes the front for taking the loan. Now, how much of it is translating to her autonomy, because she's then helping the family do whatever it is that the family wants, is again something that we actually do not know.
And just to give an example, for example, a petty shop is run by, a husband wife in a small village. And woman has typically borrowed 30, 40, 50,000 of a micro loan, but it is not just her business acumen that is playing. She is obviously a part of that process, and good that, she is economically contributing, but it is not only her decision, how to run the business, or a lot of other important decisions. Also on credit, on this masking thing, generally, and now since the ticket sizes have gone up substantially, so this possibly was true when the ticket sizes were very low, like 5,000, 10,000, what we started with about 10 years back. People were quite okay contributing for a little longer for somebody else to cover up. Ticket sizes have moved up substantially.
Right.
Beyond 1 or 2 installments, it is not possible to cover up somebody, so that comes out very quickly. So you can't go on for a very long time.
Okay. Harish, were your questions answered?
No, I mean, fine. The only thing is that I was just also, since we have a professor, about the Kerala, because it's a matriarchal society and the most literate society. Is there a difference in terms of the reach of financial services, and the, what you call, the women there? Because, you can't have a better system than that, right? I mean,
actually, I am not sure that I would characterize all of Kerala as a matriarchal society. There are some communities within Kerala that are more matriarchal than the others. So, as a whole state, it is actually not a matriarchal society. And hence, to compare Kerala averages with the others masks that issue. Kerala is also more literate, and Kerala also gets a lot of remittance money. So both these literacy and remittance money kind of changes what you are doing with the finances. And if many of your male members are outside of the country earning, then of course the decision making by the women, again the responsibility on the women changes. So the short answer to your question is again that this, how much of the difference that you may see between Kerala and let's say a Bihar or a Rajasthan is coming because there is a matriarchal society versus just literacy is higher versus just there is more income in the family because there's a lot of remittance money. All of these three will play into the differences that you will eventually see.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not just one
No,
thing.
one
Yeah.
thanks.
We have
Thank you.
another question.
Only a one-liner, in terms, I'm just telling you from a microfinance point of view, but Bihar and Kerala would behave almost in a similar fashion from a microfinance point of view. So Bihar, I would consider as, not so very literate kind of a society to a Kerala where very literate literacy we are talking about. But from the recovery and from the other point of, like from the microfinance, limited perspective of microfinance, I think they behave almost in a similar fashion.
All right. We have another question. Mr. Prabhakar Kaza would like to ask. May I request the team to unmute him so that he can go ahead with his question? He is joining us from London.
Yeah, hi. Can you people hear me?
Yes, Mr. Kaza, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, right. I know. I told them actually that attacking so many youngsters with their experience, which is far more than their age, is not really correct. But then your BBD fellow said that it's okay. So I thought I'll do that. I was a banker for about 40 years of my life, about 20 years in UK, and a substantial number of years, of course, in India. I've been to Bhavsar. I was in Bhavsar, by the way, as a deputy general manager of Chhattisgarh. So I visited Bhavsar enough number of times, enough branches, enough self-help groups, enough women's groups, everything that you can think of. Now, I've been to Anand, where I've seen it's more women who actually contributed to Anand Milk Union Limited than men. And as you probably know, the first women's cooperative bank in India was started by a woman, whom of course the country made her a president later. Now, from what I can see in the East and the West, we know when you spend a lot of years in the East, in like India, Asia, China for the matter, you end up thinking that the West is all where women are all treated equally. And of course, after Meghan Markle, I'm sure people have a different opinion today. But the reality is that you take any percentage, any socioeconomic class, the women in India are doing much better than the women in the West. Whether you take it in terms of corporate finance, corporate wealth, or in terms of education, in terms of number of chairmen of organizations, and in all levels. You might find a lot of women at the receptionist level in the banks in UK, but in the middle level, no. I've been to several meetings at senior levels in HSBC or even State Bank. State Bank was a different animal altogether. In HSBC, in UK, you are probably finding out of 20, one woman, if at all there's a woman out there. So in India, of course, women are much better. And in India, if you go to a branch manager as a woman, you might get a concession, in the sense he might end up looking at you very favorably. But in UK, such a thing is not permitted. By UK, I mean, you take the West. I mean, it's the same thing in terms of gender equality. So your chances of success, if you're an entrepreneur, are far more as a woman, are far more in India than in the West. And I've got, for example, a cousin of mine who started a college because she had to go to college walking for about 4 miles, 5 miles when she was young. She said that is enough. And now that I've become a lecturer, become about 35, 40, I'll start my own college in the village where I was in Krishna district. So she started a college of her own, school of her own, now going to be a college. So if a woman is entrepreneurial, she has better access to finance in India than in the West. What I would recommend, of course, not for you people in general, I mean, I don't know any one of you, but women who have done well for themselves in terms of management education, who have had access to higher levels of learning, is to help others who are entrepreneurial. If women help women, they will come up. I'm sure you have read all this in some management book where they say, if a woman stands for election, please vote for her. Women should form groups in organizations where you are. Men end up forming groups wherever they are, in terms of pubs, in terms of cricket, in terms of golf. And women have only ultimately turned into only parentums, in the house. So that's one more thing that I keep saying. Not much of a feminist, but being a promoter of women's cricket. Now, in terms of finance, one thing that people should end up doing is, if at all they can, like somebody mentioned, is to ensure that the money the woman makes, the man doesn't end up drinking or frittering it away. That's very, I've done my own self-help groups, monitoring and all that in Bhavsar. And I found, especially in very rural areas where there is no social governance, they end up that way. Woman earns, the man spends it off. And she ends up as a default in the bank. She has no access to banking for the rest of her life. So thank you very much for your time. If you got any comments to make, your experiences to give, I'll be happy. Thanks.
Mr. Kaza, I like the last point that you said, because, that is something that I always keep coming across. Women keeps earning and, men would end up spending and drinking and those unwanted expenses. But I hope with literacy and some awareness, things will change.
I want to comment on the numbers. So I agree that in certain sectors in India, for example, you see far more women's participation at the senior levels. And I'm very glad that you think that, in every socio-economic section, women are doing better than women in the West. However, so I don't know much about societies in the West, but if you look at labor force participation rates of women, they are actually some of the lowest in the world, and they have actually been falling over the last 10-15 years. So as India has been growing, more women seem to be withdrawing from the labor force, and that sort of is a puzzle. So on the one hand, enrollment rates are higher, but they don't translate to labor force participation questions. And there are multiple other dimensions where we actually don't look so good, despite the fact that we had a female prime minister way before many Western countries did, and some of the senior management in our banking or the financial system has had women. So I wouldn't characterize the situation that all is well in India. Maybe it's not as bad as some of us think, but certainly we have a long way to go before women gain some more autonomy across all socio-economic groups.
So I think we may have another question. Mani, do you want to ask something?
I don't want to ask something, but I just want to say something.
Please go ahead.
As an entrepreneur, I think my belief was, even as an entrepreneur, I've seen in my office, I think it's most of the women folk do much better than men because they're more committed than men, including myself. And whereas I am successful because I think it's, I believe all mama's boys are successful. Okay. So if you're successful, you need to have some like mom. In fact, I think it's Rachna, well, for every deal I do, I call up my mom and seek her blessings. So uh, I think, so women forms a very integral part of all of our lives because I think we stay with them more than we stay with our dad or that way parents, at least in my generation. Maybe the next generation is much different. So I think a good entrepreneur should be a mama's boy, and a good entrepreneur should recognize women force in the organization, and they are more loyal and good. I think that's my basic experience, personal experience. Yes. Thank you.
I think then the take should be like, I think there has been discussions since we asked questions to all three of them, Renuka, Priti, and Purvi as well. I think while there is a recognition of women's potential in different walks of life, as a borrower, as a saver, probably as an investor, I think women don't recognize their own potential. I think from there's not much enough credit they themselves give to themselves. So I guess that it
Maybe
is
we're
what
not
it
trained.
is then.
We're not trained. Yeah, and I think we're not trained when it's a culture change, and I think it's going to take a time, because from your start of your life, you never told that you always are trained that you have to be good mother, you good wife. Nobody trains you to be a good CEO, correct? So I think that's a culture change. That I think culturally, in terms of is always that when we reach one milestone, there is always a second milestone for us to reach. So I think it's a cultural change, and I think it's going to take its own time. Maybe I'm just hoping that the next generation, definitely there's a change which will come in, I think. And I'm sure that we all should actually train our daughters that you can be a CEO, you can be an entrepreneur, you can be something. And it is not only a housewife or a good mother your journey ends. I think that's a very texture change. I think everybody starts from home. That is what I think.
True. So thank you, Mani, for your thoughts. And before we take another set of audience questions, our last set of questions to each of you, if you allow me, I'll quickly start with Professor Sane. Would that be okay? Yeah. So a question to you is, so now, again, a policy-related question for you, Professor Sane. Again, nearly 50% of the population is women, but a gender budget statement is less than 5% of the total budget, and it reflects clearly low priority that women empowerment holds in our policies. And even in the total health budget of 2021, only 4% was allocated for women and girls, as per the gender budget statement. Are we missing something big here? And what should be our priority, and how should we draw focus of the government?
So yes, I think that clearly, these numbers indicate that there is a mismatch here. However, when it comes to health, my views are that the government should focus on questions of public health, which means that you clean up the air, you clean up the water, you clean up communicable diseases, you have vaccination drives. So, health consists of public health and healthcare. Healthcare is about building more hospitals and having more doctors and clinics, whereas public health is actually those goods that are non-rival and non-excludable, where government must play a role. So I think that what was nice about this year's budget was that it focused a lot more on public health. It brought questions of water, sanitation, and clean air into the health space, which is what we were not doing for many years. And in some ways, these issues affect men and women equally, right? So if there is clean air to breathe, that's why they are a public good, that they are non-rival and they are non-excludable, and hence you cannot distinguish between one person who consumes them and the other person that consumes them. So on the one hand, as long as the government is committed to doing better public health, I think that that is in the right direction. And on those questions, we should not have a gender lens. We should have clean water and clean air, and vaccination drives, communicable diseases being eradicated for everybody. Now,
Yeah.
on the questions of healthcare, yes, I think that we have to worry about more equity issues in terms of, if there is vaccination or if there is certain kind of medicine, is it that women are denied that because the men in the family get better access to some of these healthcare provisions. And I think that's where perhaps our attention should focus from a gender lens, and it's clear that we are not doing enough. So, let me give you an example. Some studies that I have seen show that when women develop heart diseases, they are taken to the doctor much later, as opposed to when the boy in the family develops some kind of an ailment. Or if you look at cancer survivors, again, data from India has shown that women actually don't get taken to the doctors for cancer medication because it's too expensive. Whereas if the man in the family gets sick, he is taken to healthcare. And I think that these are again dimensions of gender inequality that need to be addressed, that need to be brought in the forefront, so that access issues can get resolved on questions of health. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and then of course we spoke about the health part of it, but then even in the overall budget, I think the gender budget was less than 5% of the total budget. I'm assuming, including all the other aspects. So, what's your take on that?
I mean, so look, I feel that we should focus on public goods, and public goods are for everybody. So I would only look at the gender budgeting lens for those aspects that are not necessarily public goods. So I think that this 5% number should be looked at not from the overall budget, but from that part of the budget which is not a public goods question. And there, it's questions of access that become more difficult. Whether it's health, whether it's education, many of these are not public goods, but we provide them through various other tools. And what are questions of access on these issues? That's where I would say we need to start thinking about the gender lens.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. So Purvi, your turn, and here I go with the question for you. So again, 14.6 bank branches per 1 lakh adults in India, and even sparser in rural India. And access to banks in rural area is an expensive affair. People have to spend money on transportation to access banks, to withdraw their payments or subsidies. Are there innovative models that can bring banking to doorstep of women in rural India or on their fingertips? Are there innovative models in pipeline in the market today?
So Rachna, I think last 5 years, a lot of work has been done to ensure that people can reach to the banks, or that at least they have an access to some very basic banking facilities at their fingertips, or so easily accessible. In last 5 years, I think we have come up with a lot of revised and very practical guidelines on VC model, which typically ensures that you have agents available. Mostly at least one agent is available in every village, so you need not have to take that pain of taking transportation and going here and there. There are options where payment banks are available at very small little merchant locations in every nook and corner, particularly in at least every village. Also, there is some small outlet where you have an option of dealing with a payments bank. Then there are SFBs and fintech companies. Peer-to-peer lending is also, I think, something that is work in progress, and this is coupled with a lot of initiatives on digital transactions. So I think there is a scope to do a lot more than this, but I think enough scope is there in something which is already available on the plate right now. And we can expect good numbers coming in from these models itself, because all these models are quite well established. For example, SFBs, so most of them are doing very good, or a lot of fintech companies and all of that. So while there is a scope to come up with some more innovative models, and I'm sure that is there. RBI has already created a sandbox, and a lot of experiments are happening. But I think there is enough available already on the plate as we speak, and we will have to make the most of what is available.
All right, fair enough. And now we come to you, Priti. Again, innovative models, but in this age of digitization, what role do you think government can play in enabling digital literacy and access to technology to this large population that seems to be discarded? And if there is digital literacy, access to technology, which is provided by the government. How could this facilitate women's participation for financial access and using financial products that could be easier, faster, and cost effective? So
I think government has a big role to play. I would compare this as, when you have this polio, there was awareness, which there were TV ads, there were a lot of drive which we did when it comes to polio awareness. I think, here the government can do similarly, and they has to be a budget when it comes to financial inclusion literacy for women in terms of, I will not again put it gender, because the entire panel is because of a women inclusiveness. I would put across that something what we did for polio. Can we do a digital drive where we can use the technology when it comes to TV, when it comes to via internet blast? Because what I understand is, even in the rural, though the mobile penetration of women are lower, but still, is it a possibility that even the network providers, can there be a panel who will be deciding in terms of how we can educate through internet, through technology, through TV, in terms of financial inclusion literacy? I think there has to be a budget which has to be allocated. The way healthcare is important today, I think financial inclusion awareness is equally important, because it is not, you do not empower a woman, you empower generations when you do that. So I think it's extremely important that, there is a budget which has been given. Especially, we can do this through banks, we can do this through, any physical, maybe through the BC network. BC network today is definitely a large part today while we speak. Can we do through the BC network? Because the BC not only goes to the village, to the town, they meet a lot of people. Can we see that which is a common point between the government or between a bank and a consumer, and can we drive this awareness through that? I think we need to brainstorm. The government definitely needs to take this, because already urban, there is too much aggregation which is happening in urban, while in rural there is nothing which is happening. So when you talk about financial inclusion, it is including 3-tier, 4-tier, and the very lower mile of the people, which is not included in that. So I don't think the financial inclusion, I think, is something, what we have actually, I think, on that side. So according to me, it has to be like something like a polio awareness program, a digital awareness program.
Okay. And what, in terms of your experience, has been the scene like with respect to the internet connectivity? Because digitization essentially largely backs on internet. So what's the infrastructure status like in the hinterlands?
Yeah, see, I think still, tier 2, tier 3 is still, but when you go below tier 3, I think still there is a lot of work in terms of internet penetration which has to happen. And we are a long way when it comes to, in terms of, stable data connectivity which needs to happen. I'm sure, with the Reliance coming in, I'm sure it has gone to the nook and corner, when we have house help who are in very interior of Bihar and Gujarat, and who has an internet connectivity. So that is happening. So, but I think it's a long way again to go on that side.
Okay. All right. So with respect to questions, this is all we have for three of you now. And we'd like to open the floor to the audience and give them a few minutes to see if they have any questions. Shall we?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. So audience, please feel free to write in or raise your hands, and then we will give you an opportunity to voice them in case you choose to do so. So looks like there are no more questions. Well, good news for each of you. But would you have any closing remarks to say about what's in store and what should get better to to make sure that it's even both in the urban and the rural areas, it's more gender inclusive financial system, because that's just a basic right for the progress of this country. Yeah.
I would
So
say
let's-
that start including women in financial decisions. There you start at home. Make her a part of the financial decision what you take, whether she's aware or. I think that's very important. So maybe that should be the start, because I always believe that it is from the home where you start. So I think that we all should especially when it comes to financial dependent women. I think they should be a part of the financial decisions at home, whether they're taking a decision or not, but they should be a part of it. That is my take.
Okay, Purvi, go ahead. What do you?
So I'll keep it very short and simple. I think three things which are extremely important. One is creating enough awareness. Two is making it very accessible, easily accessible. And third is the affordability of whatever we are talking about, whether it is credit, deposits, insurance, whatever. So the three important things is awareness, accessibility, and affordability. If you really want financial inclusion, the way it should be.
All right. Thank you so much. And Professor Sane,
Sure.
you
I
have the
would
last
say,
word.
Yes, I would also say three things. In addition to completely agreeing with my co-panelists, I would say that we need to really worry about labor force participation of women in this country. If it is falling, then there are reasons for concern, and we need to address those concerns, because until women come out into the labor market, many of these usage questions will not get resolved. So women have to have their own independent sources of income, and why that is not happening is a concern for policy, and we need to address this. Number two, as both of them have said, I worry a lot about literacy and awareness. And this is not just awareness of what the product is and what the product does, but what their rights are and where they can seek redress. So I think that's so building mechanisms such that grievance redress can become possible is a number two. And number three, because I sit in this in an academic institution, I would say just better measurement of the impact of the various policies that we are taking. What are they leading to? Where is the effect that is happening? What is the theory of change that we have, and what levers are they impacting? Are they impacting autonomy within the household so that the bargaining power of the woman increases? Are they making the woman more empowered to step out of the house and do whatever she wants? So where are these policies actually helping? Because only when we know that can we do course correction and design better policies that lead us to more inclusive financial inclusion.
All right. Thanks a lot, Professor Sane.
Thank you.
Well, with this, we come to the end of the show, and it was a pleasure for me to host this session and listen to each of you, along with the audience members. And thank you to each one of you, Priti, Purvi, and Professor Sane, for joining us and for your time and sharing your thoughts with us. And thank you to the audience out there listening to us. Each of you have a good evening, and good evening to the audience as well. We hope to see you in the next session. Again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
having
So
me.
much. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.